Bonjour à toutes et tous, vous écoutez First Print, votre podcast comics préféré pour un nouveau numéro du format SuperFriends. Vous connaissez l'émission qui va à la rencontre des personnes qui font vivre la pop culture et la culture comics par leur travail. Et aujourd'hui, c'est une nouvelle émission en anglais et on est hyper content et fier et honoré et tout ce que vous voulez de recevoir Karen Berger en chair et en os dans notre podcast en compagnie de Corentin.
Salut, je suis très content.
Ouais. T'es content, je crois que t'es content.
Très.
Donc voilà, illustre éditrice à qui on doit la British Invasion des années 80, à qui on doit énormément de grands comics et qui depuis édite depuis 2017-2018 la ligne Berger Books chez Dark Horse. Donc on va pouvoir revenir avec elle sur tout cet aspect de la culture comics. C'est pas anodin quand même d'avoir quelqu'un comme Karen dans le podcast, donc on espère que ça vous plaira, même si c'est que en anglais, que vous pourrez apprécier cette discussion et surtout vraiment partager, faites péter les choses.
Et puis on s'en fout, nous on a kiffé.
Ouais, non mais vraiment voilà, on est vraiment super content de vous proposer cette émission, donc le générique va se lancer, puis après toute la discussion est en anglais. Kiffez bien et soutenez le podcast si ce genre d'émission vous plaît. En tout cas, on espère que vous prendrez autant de plaisir à l'écouter qu'on a eu à l'enregistrer. À tout de suite.
So we are delighted to have you, Karen Berger, here on our First Print podcast. I think it's a premiere for you. Maybe have you done a podcast for a French audience before?
I have not done a podcast for a French audience. And thank you so much for inviting me to join you both. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very excited to talk to you.
And we are humbled, really, because you're. Well, this is going to be really difficult not to fanboy a little bit with you, but let's start. So we are here to speak about Berger Books, obviously, but since we have you here on the podcast, we want to talk a little bit much about before. And so let's start a little bit about the beginning of your career, if you want to. Could you just tell us a little bit about the premise of your career when you met Mark DeMatteis, when you started to work at DC and Vertigo?
The beginning of my career?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking? Yes. Well, I knew Mark from college, and we both went to Brooklyn College, and he was several years older than me, so he got out sooner than I did. And Mark was always a huge comic book fan, unlike me. I hadn't read comics as a kid, and I just sort of fell into the medium. Really, I was just looking for a job. I was an English major. I loved art history, particularly modern art history. And I also, took a lot of journalism classes and film classes. So I had a visual sense and, enjoyed film and art a lot. But comics were sort of the furthest thing from my mind when I graduated from Brooklyn College. Mark was already working for Paul Levitz at DC Comics, and he was writing stories for the horror anthologies like House of Mystery and Time Warp, Weird War Tales. And Mark one day said, "Hey, I know this guy, Paul Levitz, who is looking for an assistant. And he doesn't want anybody who's a comic book fan because the job, most of the job is administrative. It's assisting Paul on coordinating freelancer schedules and payment and a lot of administrative stuff. Paul is one of the smartest people that I know. And early in his career, at this point, when I came into DC, he had two jobs. He was in charge of the whole business end of DC as the editorial coordinator. And then he was also editing some comics, the 3 Batman titles and House of Mystery. But he was more, so he wanted someone, I think, with a creative background, but he didn't want a comic book fan because he knew that the job was sort of bifold. Is that the right word? I don't know. bipolar, I don't know, something. Had two parts to it. So I amazingly got the job, and I quickly just fell in love with comics, as soon as I walked in there for my first interview. And it was a really special time for me. And I didn't realize that I would be staying there for like decades, literally. But I was very fortunate to have come in when I did.
And what do you think, because of your experience, what does make the editor job as something really special? What are the good qualities required to be an editor in comic books?
That's a good question. Of
course.
I think, a good editor, frankly, in any medium, has to have a good sense of story, and has to kind of understand what makes a good story, and also, a story that they're able to market and sell to other people. And so I think you need to have, as an editor, you have to have a good creative sense. You need to have a good business sense, but you also have to have a good way of working with people, because and some editors don't, and I don't necessarily feel that they're the most effective editors, but I think it's all about relationships at the end of the day. And I feel my job as an editor is to make the writer and the artist look good. They're not there to tell my story. I'm here to help them with their story, but I also have to feel that their story is worth telling and worth publishing. So that's sort of a very kind of general answer to your question.
But you've said many times that you weren't a superhero fan, and you were more into horror and supernatural, and that's what guided you towards your choices at Vertigo. What makes you special is that you're not from the specific background of the comic book nerd growing up to become an artist or a writer. Do you think that's what made your career really specific? Because it is specific. You actually change things from the inside.
Thank you. Thank you for not calling me a nerd. I think I agree with part of what you're saying. I mean, I think because I wasn't a comic book fan, I didn't come in with any preconceived notions of what a comic story could be or should be. I didn't, have that sort of history of comics, especially the continuity stuff and all the company characters sort of embedded in my being. So that wasn't sort of an issue for me. I was able to look at comic storytelling from a fresh perspective and with a real objectivity. I also feel, equally important to that is, being a woman in what then was a very male-dominated field. It still is, very much so. But particularly when I came in, 1979. I don't know if you guys were even born then, but anyway, I wasn't then,
I'm sorry.
I wasn't 10, but I was 21, but whatever. So, but yeah, I think, being a woman is, and bringing that sensibility to the job, I feel also made a big difference.
Okay, we also know that thanks to you, we
Sorry
got.
about that car outside.
Yeah, it's all right. I don't think we'll hear it. Also, it's thanks to you that we got what we call now the British Invasion. And you told before in the interview that you really liked the British spirit because they thought differently than American writers, and they've got some kind of irreverence. But do you think that this is still the case, or do you think that American writers have changed now? We can also have some irreverence in the American field now.
I think Vertigo, the writers, who worked at Vertigo all these years, particularly British writers, really did make a difference in in comic storytelling, in modern comics, and the kind of stories that you can tell in comics, and to really sort of break the mold of what makes a good comic story, and to really push the envelope, and to really challenge the medium, and to challenge themselves as writers too. So I feel that American writers have, I think comics overall, and I know this sounds selfish and maybe a bit kind of conceited, but I think that Vertigo really did change the way, the face of modern comics, mainstream comics in the United States. And, and you can see it in the generations that have followed. And I think that, it started with the British sensibility and the fact that British writers, just had a different culturally and historically, it's just they're coming to comics from a different perspective than Americans. And I thought that was a really interesting angle to take and influence. And again, going back to the fact that I feel that the British writers, again, just really were into revolutionizing the medium more than mainstream American comics writers were at the time. There was always underground comics writers, of course, but talking about specifically mainstream, comics like DC and Marvel, which is pretty much all there was back in those days.
And in the same way, when you started Vertigo, it was mostly with DC Comics characters who were revamped and reinvented, such as the Sandman or Kid Eternity. But then came the creator-owned part, and it was really, what we know now today as the Image Comics age, with the saga and every comics that goes out now at Image mostly comes back to the Vertigo revolution. So my question would be, how do you see, you're part of it, the modern indie mainstream, I would say, market of comics?
When I first started Vertigo, my publishing plan was to produce 2 series or 2 projects a month. One would be sort of a weird take on a DC character, and the other comic would be a creator-owned project. But I knew that at some point we were going to run out of DC characters, and I had very few characters really at my disposal. I wasn't interested in superhero stuff. The superhero guys didn't want me to get my hands on them either. So I was playing in this ground where the supernatural and horror characters and some offbeat superhero characters like Animal Man, that nobody really cared about. But ultimately, I did see the line as becoming a full creator-owned line. And I was, I'm very happy to say that, we achieved that at Vertigo, and for, probably the last, 10 years, 10 to 15 years that I was there, the line was primarily creator-owned, with, maybe Swamp Thing and Constantine as the only characters that came out of what was DC, well, Swamp Thing particularly came out of former DC continuity. But going back to what you had really asked me about was, how do I see modern day comics being influenced, particularly like in Image Comics? I think it's great. I think that there's so many great writers and artists out there, and so many great stories and series being published by Image, by Boom, by a lot of indie publishers. And I think that it's wonderful that creators have the opportunity and the platform now to have many places to tell their stories. Because back in the old days, there weren't that many opportunities. So I feel that it's I'm very proud to see where comics have gone, and to have helped really 2 generations of comics writers sort of get on that path and achieve their goals and to become, I mean, they came in really talented, but obviously to produce such, memorable work.
When you left Vertigo, what was your feelings about what the imprint has become? Because we saw a lot of change also due to the fact that Warner was also more and more implicated in the branding of DC Comics and Vertigo. And what were your feelings when finally DC ended the label?
I left Vertigo because the company was changing, and Warner Brothers, who had owned DC for many, many years, they pretty much left us on our own, and which had its advantages, particularly from a creative point of view, particularly in terms of creator-owned work. When Warner Brothers decided to come in, whole hog, and really concentrate on developing the superhero characters, and I believe, with a purpose, understandably, of catching up to Marvel in terms of the films, because DC, had some great films that were made, but that being able to, to see what Marvel had done cinematically, and DC really needed to get their act together, to be honest. So, from a business point of view, I understand why they put all the energy on the superhero comics. I do feel that they were personally short-sighted in terms of really tamping down the creativity and the new ideas that were coming out of Vertigo. But, not my company. So,
sure.
right. So ultimately that was the reason that I left, because I could see which way the wind was blowing already. And I knew that Vertigo at some point was going to be, put to rest. And I was like, hey, let me get out now. Well, the going's good. And yeah, so that's essentially what happened. And again, not surprising that they made the decision that they did. And if I was a business person, maybe I would have made the right decision. But I feel if you're a business person in a creative field, I think it's important to really keep your options open, especially when it comes to, looking for new ideas and new voices and new visions. So I was very happy to then set up shop at Dark Horse.
Because you didn't feel that they wanted still for Vertigo to be the place for new ideas and new writers to come out. It was not like that.
Yeah, DC wasn't interested in creator-owned projects anymore. They were interested in projects that, if they were creator-owned, they had to and somehow connect tangentially to DC characters or DC continuity, or they had to be, I think, quote unquote, more commercial, which.
Okay, so you took a short...
Whatever one thinks that is, whatever one's definition of commercial is, yeah.
So you took a short break from comic books after you left Vertigo, but less than 4 years afterwards, you started again at Dark Horse with Berger Books. So what made you come back to comic books?
Well, I really missed it. When I left, it was tough. I had a wonderful career and I really grew up at DC Comics and made so many friends. I met my husband there, and Richard Bruning, who is senior vice president and design director at DC, and is now design guru and art director at Berger Books. And, it was, an amazing time of my life. So it was, it was definitely an emotional, had emotional impact on me leaving and sort of getting used to not being at DC anymore. And so much of my identity was wrapped up at being, at founding Vertigo and all the work that I'd done there. But I felt that it was, change is good, and change is never easy usually, and nor should it be. I think we all need to be challenged in our lives, both personally and professionally. So I thought that this was a good, it was a good thing ultimately. And, I struggled a bit right afterwards, but it was good to take a break from comics. I realized after all these years, I just really wanted to kind of clear my head. So I spent some time actually working with Jeanette Kahn, the president and for many years. And Jeanette's a film producer, and she had reached out to me soon after I left. And she said to me, Karen, I know when I left DC how hard it was. I have a feeling you'll probably go through the same thing. So why don't you come work with me? I'm always looking for, new people to work with and new people who could bring in projects. So I worked on developing a number of things with her. And so that was great. And then I dabbled in a few different things, but I did miss comics. And then, when Donald Trump was elected president, it was, needless to say, a very awful time. And still feeling the effects of that. And at that point, I realized I needed to be sort of 100% focused on something. I was sort of dabbling in this and dabbling in that, and my energy wasn't, fully spent on something. And I felt that I really wanted to, get back in there in a way of telling stories that really mattered. And, working in TV and film is great, but actually getting something produced and on the air is a crapshoot. And the rewarding feeling that I got from working in comics all those years, I wanted to kind of go back and sort of harness that again for myself. But I also wanted to, selfishly, but I also felt that I still had, something to say. And I wanted to be able to, work with people, new people that I hadn't worked with in the past, but also people who I had worked with, and to really kind of get back in the game.
Yeah, and that's also a more specific question, because from the beginning of your career to the foundation of Berger Books, the entertainment field has really changed with the development of movies, video games, streaming, and so on. But you still got back to comic books. So what makes comic books so special for you? Is it still a relevant form of art nowadays? I guess the answer is yes, but could you explain why it is still relevant today?
I think comics are more relevant today than ever, because I think the rest of the world is catching up to the unique aspect of comics, and that the fact that you could, in this digital age. Sorry, I live in a quiet street, but there are a lot of trucks going through it. Sorry. Right. In this digital age where people are glued to their devices, and also are entertained by their devices as well too, in terms of video games and just social media and TikTok, and everybody just is always looking at their devices. Being able to actually have a book that you can hold in your hands, and it's okay reading digitally as well too, of course, but I'm still a book person, and being able to have that escape and that intimate relationship with a story, I think is very special. And the fact that comics, is that amazing blend of writing and art makes it, even more special.
Okay, so could you explain a little bit to us, because we don't know in France, how works Berger Books as a structure
company?
As a company, yeah. How does it work? What's your what do you do on a daily basis at Berger Books?
Oh, okay. Well, I have a great gig here. I will say that, because when I came back into comics, I called up Mike Richardson because I had looked around at other comic book publishers and book publishers, and I had been offered jobs from other people, but Dark Horse was the one place that actually I wasn't offered a job at, but when I looked around and try to visualize where I think I could be happy working, and the place where companies where the publishing attitude and perspective was simpatico with my own. Dark Horse really stood out, not only from a creative point of view, but from a creators' rights point of view, from the progressive nature of the work and the stories that have always been told at Dark Horse, and Mike Richardson's commitment to comics and to creators all those years. I have a lot of respect for Mike. And, he built this company into a small company, into quite a large company, published so many wonderful books. And Dark Horse also has really terrific production values. They produce beautiful books. And I was interested less in the floppies and more in the actual book form. And so when I came back, I wasn't really looking to get back into comics on a monthly comic basis, which is, as you know, how we do it here in the States. We're not smart like you guys over there and do classes, which is a lot. You can plan out your time better. It's not like that sort of, monthly grind, which, I'm slowly getting out of my system, out of decades. It's you don't realize you have it, but it's like you're always on deadline. But when I came back to Berger Books, I really wanted to get my hands dirty. I didn't want to build a whole big thing like Vertigo again. I wanted to edit again. And with Vertigo, I wasn't hands-on editing that much. But for many years, I wasn't in the middle part of my career at Vertigo. I was barely doing any hands-on editing at all. It was all editor-in-chief stuff, and being very involved in the development process and in acquiring projects and getting projects off the ground with the editors. But on the day, I wasn't doing the day-to-day, and I missed doing the day-to-day. So I really wanted to get my hands dirty. I didn't want to have a staff. I didn't want to do a lot of books. I wanted to keep my sanity, have a good time, and put out some good comics by some people who have something to say, and people who I like, and people who I would want to work with. So, I know I'm not answering your question again. I'm doing that again. But a typical day is, depending on what project I'm working on, really depends on what work is up on my plate, and I juggle a handful of books at the same time, and working with the writers and the artists and say the colors of the letter as necessary.
I have a follow-up on what you just said about the floppies. We actually noticed that Berger Books is leaning toward graphic novels. Which was the case for a number of series.
We actually stopped doing the floppies, and we're not now just doing original graphic novels. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, my simple question is why?
Why? Because we during the pandemic, Dark Horse stopped publishing for several months, and but we also saw that the backlist, the books that were collected into graphic novels, were doing well. Sales-wise, so we realized that it made better sense economically if we skipped doing the floppies and just go straight to original graphic novel. And for me too, it's always been about the book form. The floppies were sort of another way of getting to that form, and also sort of having the best of both worlds in terms of the comic book audience and the book audience. This way, now we're going straight to graphic novel form. And it's tougher if you want to do, say, ongoing series, just in terms of the amount of time it might take to produce that. But, that's the way it is. And that's what book publishers do too, when they do works of series fiction. So I'm really sort of approaching myself more as a book publisher who happens to publish comics or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does actually.
Right. The comic book publisher publishes graphic novels, not books.
You also said you wanted to work with new people. I was thinking about the diversity, I guess you'd say, of the different artists you're recruiting. I was thinking about Anthony Bourdain, who's a chef, who was a chef, about Christopher Cantwell, who worked in TV series with Halt and Catch Fire. Do you have a specific recruiting process or vetting process, or is it just feeling, or maybe the quality of the pitch?
No process. It's really, I worked with Anthony Bourdain and Joel Rose at Vertigo on Get Jiro graphic novels. So I already had, a relationship and a connection, with Bourdain there. And who was a huge comic book fan. So it was really timing, synchronicity, man. So much of it is synchronicity and connecting with people at certain times. And he and Joel had this, great, anthology series, about
Angry Ghosts.
Hungry Ghosts, yeah. And then, Chris Cantwell, I met through Willow Wilson, and comics fan, hadn't written a comic book before, brilliant writer. I also, reached out to Nnedi Okorafor, who did the science fiction novelist, who had done one little tiny short story at Vertigo right before we left, a time warp story, when she was really at the beginning of her fiction writing career then. And I, was really looking for people who, didn't necessarily come out of the comics landscape. And people with more diverse backgrounds and to be more inclusive and representational from the people, with the writers that I'm working with and the stories that I have to tell.
Yeah, that was another question I had. You said many times during different interviews that the fact that you're a woman was, I don't know how to say that in English, a differentiation from the typical editor of comics. I was noticing that Berger Books actually had a lot of leading ladies, female protagonists. Is that something that's conscious, or is just an accident, or
just an accident? I think I'm working with a lot of women writers. Anna Sente. Yeah. Who, is, a legend in her own right, and such a wonderful comics writer, and just a wonderful writer in general. And, we, did 2 books together, Ruby Falls and the Seeds, which is out now in France, as well as Everything, which is out now in France, and Invisible Kingdom, which is also out now in France, all from 3 different publishers. So I feel really fortunate and lucky, and again, great synchronicity there. But even, some of the men who have worked, on comics, like Chris Cantwell and James DeMatteis, their stories, and Pete Milligan as well, great writer Pete Milligan, also have female protagonists in their stories. I think it's just really, I don't sort of like say to people, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. A lot of it's what people pitch to me. I might suggest things to them as to, pumping up a female character more.
Sure.
But I am not interested in doing real guy stories right now, to be honest. So
I can understand.
Perspective, I feel like I've done that my whole career in many ways, in interesting ways. But I've, because there's so many women who sort of grew up reading Vertigo comics, and because the male writers were were telling stories that appealed, to them as well. Appealed to people. It wasn't like just a male, like superhero comics were.
And by the way, you have
unisex comics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just sort of how I've always seen myself as an editor, not really appealing to men or to women. And I feel like, as a woman, I, enjoy reading books about men as well as, and just about people, women as well. But I feel that women have been underrepresented in comics, from a creative point of view and from a story point of view. So yes, that's why my books tend to be more focused.
And do you have any idea about the diversity of your readership? Since now times have changed and there are more female protagonists and female writers, do you see an evolution in the availability from comics to women?
Most definitely. I think not only from the comics that I work on, but, particularly in American comics, young adult graphic novels, and even middle grade graphic novels. Raina Telgemeier, who is a superstar in American middle grade graphic novels published by Scholastic, she really sort of broke open graphic novels for young girls and for young boys too. Just the medium really exploded for younger readers, and which is really wonderful. And it's kind of funny or ironic in a way is that book publishers, well, I'll talk about graphic novels, but they'll only talk about them for young people. They won't really, with exception of like an Alison Bechdel or an Art Spiegelman, or, obviously there are exceptions of what a quote unquote book publisher might publish, but your traditional book publishers, when they talk about graphic novels, they're talking about graphic novels for kids or younger people, which I think is just kind of ironic, because people would never look at book publishers would never be interested in comics for kids, and they would look down upon them. And I still feel in many ways that there is, just my opinion, that there is still some reticence in a lot of straight book publishers in America to not get in fully on adult graphic novels. They're still doing it very sort of sporadically. Abrams has a great imprint. First, Second does some adult books. They tend to be more in the young adult, but some of their stuff can be
Abrams Comic Arts.
Abrams, yes, Abrams, yeah. But they do more adult stuff, and First, Second as well. But yes, and Pantheon will do an occasional graphic novel, but not really that many. So it's kind of interesting to see that regular book publishers have not embraced the graphic novel form for adults as much as they've embraced it for younger people. And I wonder if they still think of it as a juvenile format. I don't know. Yeah, they're wrong. But But anyway,
we have a lot of them coming in France too.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But, and again, one of the things, that I'm trying to do at Berger Books is to publish more original graphic novels for adults. Mm-hmm. And if you look at comic book publishers, yes, Fantagraphics has been around, Jordan Quarterly. They published some very, wonderful books themselves. But but the other comic book publishers, again, they'll publish an occasional graphic novel, but they still tend to be very floppy comic book format. And I'm trying to focus Berger Books now, particularly since the pandemic, where I'm just looking at things as original graphic novels, to kind of escalate the graphic novel for adults more in publishing.
But still, because at the beginning of Berger Books, you still managed to publish in the single issues form, and then you said after the pandemic also you completely stopped. But you still had like you wanted to see if the single issue was still working.
Exactly, and it was also a way to get things out fast too. And I wanted to kind of get myself on the board, pretty soon. I didn't want to announce and then come out, 2 years later. I wanted to announce and come out a year later, which is very much what I did. I think I signed the Dark Horse in February 2017, and I published, I think, January 31st, 2018 with Hungry Ghosts. And then followed a week later by Incognito, which was the Vertigo edition of the Vertigo edition, the Berger Books edition of the Vertigo, and then which we followed by a prequel miniseries, which we then collected. But yeah, I was sort of doing it at the beginning, the best of both worlds, but a good thing, probably at least for me, the only professionally good thing that came out of the pandemic was it also gave me the opportunity to look at comics, to look at what I was doing and saying, let me just do these as graphic novels. Just, it makes a lot more sense. And it takes longer to get things out, obviously. So, and I'm only doing about 4 or 5 a year. So, and you need to schedule them like a year ahead of time as well, particularly in the American book market. So, things might be quiet for me for a while, but then I'll announce a couple of things. And things might be quiet, I'll announce a couple of things. But that's how it works in book publishing as well, too. So, I'm lucky that I, just working with a lot of talented people. And when we do announce their projects, it's always exciting.
Okay, so you mentioned the Trump presidency just before, and we can also see in a lot of your books that you are addressing societal or political thematics like religion with Invisible Kingdom, or ecology with the seeds, and consumerism with everything. So yeah, I guess you still think, and you've ever thought that comic books also have to address societal issues while still telling stories?
Excuse me. Yeah, I've always thought that, comics were a great platform to address, societal and political aspects of our lives and our times. And, back in the Vertigo days, we published a lot of political work. And, and Berger Books, honestly, is very much, the sensibility of the line is very much an extension of what I was publishing at Vertigo. And I think, as an editor and as a publisher, when you're working with story, you want your story to be about something thematically. And there are plenty of, listen, I'm all for entertainment and escapism.
Are you?
Yeah, as opposed to depressing stuff that makes you, whatever. Yeah. That makes you want to hide under the bed or something. But I think with any form of literature or entertainment, you want to keep people engaged, but I feel like you want to say something. You want the works to be about something. We're all human. We all look for, we're all looking for stories to help us kind of, deal with the world, to show us different parts of the world, to transport us to different places, and to really just tap into what it's like to be human. And thematically, theme is always such a big aspect to the books that I'm working on. And if you look at a book like The Seeds, you could have done that story, in a very different fashion. You could have had your, tech people on one side of the wall and your, people who have ditched the system and gone off on the other side of the world and done a very different story. It didn't have to be about the planet dying. It didn't have to be aliens coming to this dying planet and trying to salvage what was left of humanity here. You didn't have to have a love story. You didn't have to really deal with the ecological environmental breakdown of the planet. So thematically, the stories about tech and people abandoning tech, but that's more honestly the surface story, and I think the heart of the story really comes down to what humanity has done, to the earth, and the position it's put us in, and how does one, get through it. So yeah, it's a excellent question in terms of identifying the themes there, Nicholas, and you're not Nicholas, you're Nicholas. Did I just call you by a different name?
Arno.
Oh, you're Arno. Right. Nicholas was the publisher. I'm sorry.
Yes, Nicholas.
Sorry. Yeah.
But speaking about Nicholas, I wanted to get just a little bit about everything and this kind of books, because as an editor, you all about creating stuff and letting your writers and artists express themselves. But as an editor, you said before, it's also like a marketing also position a little bit. So you have to make the comic books sexy. I say for the readership. So how do you also trace the line between the weirdness of a comic book and also the fact that you have to make it appealing, because like the Christopher's Count Wester's, like She Could Fly or everything is great, but it's also kind of really weird. So how do you make it sexy?
Well, I think weird is sexy,
That's unnecessary.
Yeah, and I think normal is boring, and I think there are a lot of people who think like that as well too, and but it needs to be relatable. It's not weird for weird's sake. And I think that's the difference between, people who, especially when I was starring Vertigo, there were a lot of, people who came in who try to do, from other publishers who try to do Vertigo-like books, and they'll say, oh, it's weird, it's like Vertigo, or it's weird, so it has to be good. It's like, no, it doesn't have to be good if it's weird. If it's weird, there needs to still be context. It still has to be relatabilities. You need to be saying something in the work that you're doing, and you still want to be invested in the characters. And thematically, you want to have an underpinning in your story. And going back to everything, I mean, you're talking about, the pursuit of the American dream and the pursuit of happiness. And it's not necessarily even the American dream. I think, globally, it's just the pursuit of just being happy in one's life, and consumerism, how we're all slaves to, to consumerism and buying things, and how dependent we are upon that, and just sort of the feel-good nature of the world as it's presented to us. And I think particularly even more so now that, we're all on our devices all the time. There's just this, almost expectation that everybody has to be happy, or everybody should be happy. And, it's clearly not the case, as we know. And I think if anything, social media just sort of amplifies, our feelings, good and bad. There's just more, exposure and more ways to, relate and connect to people. And connectivity is a good thing, but could also be a harmful thing as well too. And I know I'm sort of rambling, getting off topic a bit, so I apologize. But I think when you market something, you still want to have a handle on what's appealing about the story. and try to sort of relate it to other films or books when you're trying to sell something, to help readers get a grasp on it. I saw that Nicholas, with everything, I believe was
Twin Peaks and The Leftovers.
And Leftovers, yeah, which was great. Yeah. Proof.
Worked on us.
We've also seen some kind of cultural backlash in the United States, and it's also happening in France, especially when we've got comic books which are talking about specific thematics, almost about sometimes for LGBT thematics, or even like a mouse has been banned in some states. Do you feel that your books could be also threatened by this kind of really conservative climate?
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's America is just in such a sad state. I mean, I was reading Publishers Weekly, which is, a trade magazine for book publishers. And one of their highlights the other day was this week in book banning. I'm kind of like, it's almost like, which libraries are banning this? And it was kind of like, I mean, this is sort of what it's come to now. And I'm not surprised, I wouldn't be surprised if any of my books, the Berger Books, I had stuff, a lot of protests about books that I worked on at the time. Like Preacher,
Constantine also,
and Constantine, right? Shade the Changing Man as well.
Sure, yeah.
But I mean, it's this country is really in a sad state, and if my books are called out by some crazy right-wing people, then if anything, there's more exposure for the book. But I don't want it to happen to anybody, but it's a very bad time in this country. Very, very bad time.
What are your plans in terms also of publishing a long form series? Because so we know you don't want to get into the single issues for format, but like we've seen that most of the Berger books are quite short. Like Invisible Kingdom is three volumes. Do you plan at some times to do a more longer series? Because we noticed also in the whole indie field, not especially at Berger Books, that the tendency now is to make shorter stories. We don't have many like Saga is one of the few indie that has more than 50 issues, for example.
Right. Yeah. Honestly, it's all about sales at the end of the day. It really is. It's there's just an oversaturation of comics, in general, I think. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff being published, but there's a lot of crap being published too. And, it's hard to kind of make your way through what's good but on the plus side, there are more comics, there's more diversity of comics for different readers as well too. But the comics audience has grown. But, even in book publishing, it's, there's just so much stuff out there. And to be able to commit financially as a publisher to a series, honestly, for more than a year, even a year is really tough, especially on something that's creator owned, because the company, the publisher doesn't have as much vested in it, on the back end as they would, say, on a company character. And at Image, it's a whole different economic model. So it's it's kind of Images. Really, really glad that they're there. but the books that are long running books at Image are books that are making nice money for the people who are creating them, and so they're able to keep on producing them. For more traditional comic book publishers, it's more difficult, and but getting back to the original graphic novels that I'm doing, if I am constructing them with the writers to be standalone stories, but I have a couple that could very well continue into a follow-up, a sequel, or a whole series if the first one does well too. So again, it's following a lot of it is the book publishing model.
Do you feel like you've reached the hypothetical first goal that you had when you started Berger Books? I mean, in just 5 years, you've made quite an impact. You've gathered some Eisner Awards.
Yeah, you've got already Eisner Awards.
Yeah. In France, we have great editions of your books.
LaGuardia won a Hugo.
Yeah. Congratulations to her.
Thank you. That is amazing.
We have some of your projects in France. We feel like it's a job well done. How do you see the next 5 years? I guess for a company.
Well, I am working with a number of writer artists now, and which is, also been fun. And I kind of feel like the direction is just kind of continuing, the vision that I really kind of set forth at Vertigo, is to, create a home for creators to tell stories that make a difference in the world, that shake things up, that kind of look under the surface of what's going on in the real world, and to really, challenge ourselves, as human beings, but to, also provide, a story that, says something at the end of the day. And, that's always, kind of what I've been about as an editor. I want people to walk away after they've read a book and really feel like they've got something out of it, as opposed to something that's kind of throwaway that they, forget about after they turn the last page.
You actually got back some
more
of
the
your...
same. Simple answer, more of the same. Right, yeah.
You also got back some of your Vertigo works. I was thinking about Enigma.
Yes. Oh, yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
I love it, actually.
It was the first original story it was edited by Vertigo, and it was recently republished, I think, in graphic novel.
I just republished it at Berger Books, yeah.
And there was Air too?
Air is Air is coming out end of this year, the first volume. So we're doing I've been trying to get my hands on some Vertigo books that have where the creators have been able to get the rights back, and I believe we have a publisher in France. I forget who it is. Who
for Enigma? It's Urban Comics.
It is Urban. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Great volume.
Yeah, right. We produced a beautiful, I'm looking at right now, beautiful edition. And, much better than we ever produced at Vertigo, to be honest. We also, and with Air too, where it's great to be able to represent very seminal Vertigo books at different stages of Vertigo's history, being able to position it and present it to a new audience today, and as well as giving it books, presentation that they should have gotten back in the day. So, especially in the case of Enigma. So, that's exciting for me as well too.
Is this something you want to keep on doing?
I'm always looking to see what's available and what I'm going to get my hands on. It's slim pickings. It's slim pickings. Yeah. Yeah.
And how about adaptations? Because we've seen a lot of new indie publishers like TKO or A-Way Studios that are doing a lot of comic books every month. And some of them are clearly intended to be like pitches for for other medias like the TV, television, or other movies. Do you think also a little bit about the possibilities of adaptations when you're doing your comic books?
If the story has potential for film or TV, that's great. But that's not the reason for me to publish a book.
Straight answer.
Yeah. So yeah, that's my answer.
And because we were just mentioning urban comics just before, you've never thought about co-publishing something with a French editor for the French market, especially because we've seen some editors, publishers doing this in France.
Well, I know that Urban has done that with Image, haven't they? Or they've done no, not with Image. They've done hasn't Urban done some stuff first, like with Sean Murphy and.
Yeah, but I was more thinking about Glenn also, who did several co-publishing, which is doing, and now Dupuis is doing a co-publication with Image or with Step by Bloody Step from Cy Spurrier and Matthias Berger. So there have been some stuff going on between American and French publisher, and I was just wondering if that's something that you might have been thinking of, because we know that a lot of Americans are in love with our French books and the French market.
Yeah,
per se.
I am for sure. Yeah. I love the Everything edition that that Nicholas did. It's really that hard.
He's a bit crazy about the format.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, you guys have been ahead of the game for for a long time in terms of comics and in terms of albums and presenting them as books as opposed to kind of throwaway floppies. I haven't been approached, but I would definitely be interested in it. So yeah, tell your friends.
we will be.
They'll be listening.
We've just reached the hour, so I think we will set you free. So
okay, well, this has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it.
I just had one last question, which is my fanboy moment. I grew up reading Vertigo comics when I was a teenager. Right now, we see that you're still working through the industry through these tough times for comics and for America. I just wanted to ask you: did you feel like did you realize how important you were for this generation of indie readers or French comic book fans, even, or is that something you don't think about every day?
That was a good.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Okay, so we know that every editor is proud of every books they worked on. But
no,
if
don't
you
ask me. Don't ask me that question.
Who's your favorite child?
Don't do it. I'm not going to answer it.
Well, I tried.
We tried. I know. Yeah, but this when people usually ask me this question, I usually say like several things, you know. But I probably, if I had to pick one thing, okay, that was the percentage higher than everything else, it'd have to be Swamp Thing. Working with Alan and Steve and John and Rick, those times were just, they were magic. They were just magical. And it was before anything, we were under the radar there. You know, Alan is a genius. Alan is a genius. And it was just a really, you know, just amazing time, you know, in comics, you know, for me personally, you know, how much working with Alan changed my career, changed my life. And so Swamp Thing, it was a really great time. I was really close friends with everyone at that time too. So it was like a whole sort of family atmosphere. And so I'd say Swamp Thing.
All right. Well, you did answer finally. That's really great.
Journalism.
Yeah.
So we will set you really free this time. So we just have to thank you so much for accepting to do this podcast with us. It's really humbled to have you here, and it was a really great time with you. So just thank you, Karen, and we'll see what the next books from Berger Books are, and we are looking forward to read them.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed talking to both of you.
Likewise.
Yeah. Thanks.